Hello, this is Dr. DeAndrea Matthews. You know what time it is. It's Thursday evening, 7 p.m. That means it's time for our Visions International Bible study. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. I am going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. We are on a series called Wounded Warriors, and this is part 2 of Wounded Warriors. And I want to just share with you some things that God has shown me on this evening. And the first thing that I have to say, and I'm going to reiterate this a couple times, is your brokenness and your wounds are not the end of your story. So we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 30 on this evening. Anyone who knows me knows that I love the Old Testament. The Old Testament has such rich revelation. So we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 30, and I'm going to read most of that chapter. So I'm going to go ahead and get started reading that. I'm reading from the English Standard Version this evening, and I want to read most of this chapter because it's such a good story, and we can learn so many lessons from the story as a whole. So rather than focusing on one specific portion of it, I'm going to read through 1 Samuel 30, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to give you some pointers as far as what the Lord has shown me. So 1 Samuel chapter 30 in the English Standard Version, or ESV, says, "Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both great and small. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, 'Bring me the ephod.' So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord. 'Shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them?' He answered him, 'Pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue.' So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David, and they gave him bread and he ate. They gave him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you from?' He said, 'I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid against the Negeb of the Cherethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire.' And David said to him, 'Will you take me down to this band?' And he said, 'Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band.' And when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped, except 400 men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back all. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, 'This is David's spoil.'" The story doesn't end there. Verse 21 of 1 Samuel 30. "Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David, and who had been left at the brook Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart. But David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. And he made a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. I'm going to stop right there. We read verses 1 through 25 of 1 Samuel chapter 30. I'm going to say it one more time, and I'll probably say it a couple more times before we get done. Your brokenness and wounds are not the end of your story. I'm going to do a quick recap because what's going on in this story, if you have not read it before, if you're just hearing it for the first time, David and the men who were fighting with them had just finished one battle. They come home and they find that the enemy has stolen everything that was dear to them. So they just got finished fighting a battle. They're looking forward to going home. When they get home, they find that the worst thing that they could have imagined has happened. Have you ever been coming out of one battle, coming out of one storm, and just as soon as you thought that storm was over and you were going to get a break and you were going to get a chance to rest, then something else happens that devastates you? I'm here to tell you that that's what my life has been this year. The month of January was chaotic. For those of you who don't know, it started with at the beginning of the year, my mother had a stroke and was hospitalized. While my mother was still in the hospital, our son was brutally murdered. While we're still grieving his death, my daughter ends up hospitalized. It was one thing after another. Just as soon as you think you're just coming up to catch some air and to be able to start to breathe, then you find out something else happened, and then something else happens on top of that. So I want to encourage you with this story on this evening, and it's personal for me. So when I say your brokenness and your wounds are not the end of your story, I'm not telling you about something that I just read about. I'm telling you something that I lived through and I'm living through now. So I want to start and go back to John chapter 10, verse 10. I know we read 1 Samuel 30, verses 1 through 25, but John 10:10 says something I just want to remind you of. It says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus's goal is for us to experience abundant life, but in pursuing that abundant life, in pursuing the things of God, in pursuing the things that Jesus wants us to have, the enemy's going to come along and he's going to try and take you out. And that's why we have to stay prayed up. That's why we have to stay encouraging other people. When we come out of one battle, sometimes the enemy knows that you're weak, and that's the best time to attack. When we haven't had enough sleep, when we haven't had time to pray, when we're wore down, when we're tired, our body is physically tired, we're not getting any sleep. Sleep is a weapon. When you're able to get some sleep, your body's able to function as it's supposed to. So you want to make sure that you're getting sleep. But what happens is the enemy knows when you haven't been sleeping. The enemy knows when you haven't been praying, and he knows that those are your weak times, and he studies our behavior, and he knows when the best time to attack is. So that's when he comes in. After you're coming out of one battle, after you're coming out of one storm, he wants to come in because his goal, the word of God says, is to steal, kill, and destroy. But we want to make sure that we are standing on the promises of God. And as we continue to stand on the promises of God, we have to know his word. So let's go back and do a recap of the story. What happened in this story in 1 Samuel chapter 30? It starts out by saying when they come out of this battle and they come home and they realize their wives, their daughters, their sons, everybody's gone. And the place where they called home, even though it was a temporary stop, the place where they called home at that moment was burned to the ground. They couldn't even lay their head down and get some rest. They just had to keep going. Have you ever been tired and looking forward to going home and getting a nap, or going home and getting some rest, and you find out that something now has happened and you're not going to get no rest no time soon? Anybody ever experienced that besides me? That's what they're coming back to. And as they're coming back to it, they wept. It says they wept until they had no more strength. Have you ever cried so much that you just felt like you couldn't cry anymore, that everything had just been poured out of you? That's what's going on. They wept until they had no more strength. It also says essentially that they were angry and bitter. They were angry and bitter to the point where they wanted to stone their leader. They wanted to stone David, the one who had walked with them in battle. It wasn't like he was, up in a castle or a palace and telling them what to do. He was on the battlefield with them. So now they're angry and they're bitter. And what happens when you're angry and you're bitter? You turn against the people that are closest to you. So they turned against their leader and they wanted to stone their leader. So they wanted to stone the one who not only fought beside them, but also the one who covers them. Sorry about that. They also wanted to stone the one who covered them, who walked with them. So what does it say happened next? And I'm just doing a recap and a summary. It says that David had to strengthen himself in the Lord. So sometimes the people who are covering you, the people who are fighting for you and with you, sometimes you have to go before the Lord and strengthen yourself. It says David strengthened himself in the Lord. You have to be able to recognize when you're weak. You have to be able to recognize when something's not right. You have to be able to recognize and do a self-examination and say, you know what? I need more of God. I need to be in his presence. I need more prayer. I need more word. I need more meditation. I need to spend time with the Lord. And that's what David was wise enough to do. So as we continue to look at this story in 1 Samuel 30, it goes on to say that he sought the Lord. And as he sought the Lord, God answered. So in the text it says that, he asked for the ephod, he called for the ephod. He prepared himself to go before the Lord. He prepared himself to enter into the presence of God. He prepared himself to inquire of the Lord, and God answered him. And God essentially told him, yes, pursue and go after that thing that they took from you. And not only that, the Lord made fit that this Egyptian, this servant, got sick. And he had been sick 3 days. So now he stayed behind, and David was able to come, and he was an ally. So God sent help to them in their time of need. God will send help to you. It might not look like you're expecting it to look. It might not appear the way that you thought it might appear, but God will send help for your journey. He will send help and support to help you to reach the thing that you're trying to do. And that's what happened in this case. The Egyptian was able to tell them right where the Amalekites were. And guess what? It said they recovered all. Nothing was missing. Everything that was taken, they got it back and then some. And not only that, it was 600 men total. And I got to tell this part because, this is how the story kind of wraps up. Not only did they recover all, but it was a few folks in with the men that were fighting with them that kind of had a funky attitude. You ever had somebody that was fighting with you, but something about them just wasn't right? Well, they had some folks like that with them, with David's crew. So you had 600 men total. 400 went with them to take back what had been stolen from them. 200 were too tired and stayed behind. Because remember, this was not their first battle. They had just come out of at least one battle when they got home and found out that their wives and children had been taken and the town burned down. So 200 were too tired and just physically didn't have anything else to give. So they stayed behind. So David went forward with 400 men. So after they recovered all, they come back and meet up with the 200 that stayed behind. And some of those men who had a little funky attitude gonna tell them, you know what, y'all don't deserve none of this spoil. Y'all can get your wives and your kids and y'all can go about your business. But this right here is ours. And David told them, no, that's not how we're doing. Because David recognized, because he inquired of the Lord, because the Lord said, this is what I'm going to do for you. This is what I'm going to allow you to retrieve. I'm on your side. I'm fighting with you. I'm fighting for you. And because David recognized we didn't do this in our own strength, just because I had 400 of y'all still fighting with me, I'm not going to treat the others like they had no part in this. Because whether you are physically on the battlefield or whether you stayed behind and you're an intercessor or whatever your role is that God has given you, you take a part in recognizing that had it not been for the Lord on my side, I don't know where I would be. So David recognized as the leader that it wasn't because of the 400 men that were fighting. It wasn't because of anything that he did as a leader. He recognized that it was because of the Lord on their side and not because of their own strength. One of the things that I personally had to learn as we were going through our storms this year comes from Proverbs 3:5. It was a reminder to me that I could not trust and rely in my own strength. I had to depend on God. I had to depend on him to just keep me going. So Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean to your own understanding. It's not going to make logical sense all the time. It's not going to add up when you look at it as far as reason. But when you continue to trust in the Lord, you have to understand God stands outside of time. We live in time, but he's infinite. He stands outside of time. So he already knows what's going to happen, and he tries to prepare us for what is to come. So we have to learn how to trust in the Lord with our whole heart and not lean to our own understanding, because there's some things we're not going to understand. We're not going to see it coming. We're not going to know what to expect or how to handle it. But when you trust in God, like I said, your brokenness and your wounds are not the end of the story. That's all I have to share with you on tonight. I just wanted to come on and remind you real quick, there's some wounded warriors on the battlefield. And just like those 200 men that stayed behind because they were just physically exhausted, had nothing else to give, there's some people who are fighting with you, who are praying for you, who may not physically be able to be there, but know that they are still standing with you. And we have to still encourage one another, whether we are the wounded warriors that are staying behind or whether we are the ones that are actively fighting on the battlefield that still have been worn down, that still have suffered some sorrow, that still have suffered some heartbreak and some heartache. But guess what? God is still fighting for us and with us, and we will recover all. So your brokenness and your wounds are not the end of your story. The enemy wants you to give up hope and to lose faith in moving forward and ever accomplish it or receiving what God has for you. He wants to make you think it's never going to happen. But I want to tell you, keep trusting in the Lord. That is the word on tonight. Just to recap the scriptures, I want you to read these on your own. The main text came from 1 Samuel chapter 30. We read verses 1 through 25. Read the whole thing so that you can get the whole story about what's going on with David and the men that are fighting with them, the loss that they suffered, and how they were able to recover all. We also looked at John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And then we closed out with Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. Those are our three scriptures on this evening. And I'm going to say it one more time just for the road. Your brokenness and your wounds are not the end of your story. So as we close out part 2 of Wounded Warriors, I just want to remind you, your brokenness, your wounds, it's not the end of your story. Whatever storm you're coming out of and whatever storm you're going back into, guess what? That's not the end of the story. That's not how it's going to end. So keep trusting in the Lord. I love you all. Have a great evening. Good night.